Welcome to Dad's XP. My name is CJ, and today we'll be looking at Palworld. As always, if you enjoy the video, make sure you subscribe, like the video, and drop us a comment. You guys leave us awesome comments all the time, and it's really a pleasure to read through them, so we really do appreciate it. On Palworld's release back in January, it broke multiple records on Steam and Xbox. For Xbox, it was the biggest third-party launch in Game Pass history, and for Steam, it came only second to PUBG for most concurrent players of all time. And so that should tell you just how popular this game was. Since then, it's received numerous updates, along with a huge update just a couple days ago, so we thought we'd dive back in and give you guys an idea of what we think of it. Now, while I did say this game released back in January, that's really only a half-truth. The game is still in early access, but access was granted in January. That being said, they've proved good faith, having had multiple updates since then, along with regular communication with the community on their Discord and on Steam. So if you're one of the people who jumped in back in January but you haven't touched the game since, don't worry because I'll be covering all the updates since then. Palworld is really one of those games that is kind of hard to describe until you play it. Originally, it was advertised in a way that people made the joke, Pokemon with guns. Now, that's not entirely not true, but at the same time, it really does stand on its own as something unique and interesting. But if you wanted an example of something that it's similar to, I would say it's a good mix between Ark, Survival Evolved, and something like Pokemon or Digimon, but most of you probably know Pokemon. At its core, it's a creature collector game with survival elements, so you'll need to do things like sustain your hunger, make sure that you're staying warm, all while trying to go out there and find pals that you like, breed them, capture them, fight them, whatever your heart desires. And I think one of the things that's so great about Palworld is visually, from an art style standpoint, it's just such a good looking game. It runs fantastic, at least on Steam where I played it. You know, the designs are really good. While they have been criticized for being very similar to some Pokemon, I think that they are still very good, regardless of that. The world is very interesting. There's a lot to explore. It feels very Breath of the Wild in exploration sense, like with the stamina bar, the way that functions, and the gliding and things like that. So it does feel like they've sort of cherry-picked all these great features from a lot of other games and then just put them into theirs, which some people have criticized the game for, but in all honesty, it makes for a great game. So you'll pretty much start out with nothing, but as you continue to catch new pals and battle and level up, you'll start to unlock more and more recipes to add things to your base, as well as armor, weapons, things of that nature, and new and improved ways to catch pals and fight pals. And your pals can be used for a lot of different things, like I said, battling before, but one of the coolest features in this game is the fact that you can put your pals to work in your base for you. You just assign them a task via a certain item that you unlock, and it allows them to do things like mine for stone or gather wood, or they could be farmers, or they can graze and drop items. There's lots of different ways that you can utilize your pals in this game, which I think is really cool because a lot of times in these creature games, you get a party, and that's kind of like the only group of creatures that you'll interact with from that game, whereas this gives you a use for a lot more creatures than you would normally use in a lot of other games that are similar to this. And I mean, also from a survival game standpoint, having a bunch of like NPC workers in your base to do a lot of the dirty work that otherwise you would have to do is really huge and really kind of cuts back on the grind of this game. Now, speaking of grind, I think one of the most important things I want to talk about with Palworld is whether or not this is the kind of game that dads are going to have time for. As a dad, these kinds of games can be somewhat daunting because you worry about time investment and, you know, how much you're putting in versus how much you're getting out. But one of the best things about Palworld is all the settings are adjustable, from XP rates, gathering rates, whether or not you drop your items when you die, damage from player, player stamina reduction rate. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. This game is fully customizable to your needs. In terms of if you don't have a lot of time but you want to see all the game has to offer, this game enables you to do that. But if you want a longer experience, you can have that too. You can make it as easy or as difficult as you want, and I think that's one of the ways that this game really shines is in terms of time management. This game works for you no matter what. The audio for Palworld is what I would call bog standard. It is nothing that's going to blow you away, but it exists in the game, and not in a bad way. It is neither noticeably good or noticeably bad, and ultimately I think that's completely fine. I mean, I don't expect every game to have an immaculate soundtrack or like, you know, insane sound design, but it is certainly passable. That being said, there are a few things about this game that did bother me. One of the things that I would say immediately is that there are some bugs that you may notice where AI pathing is off for your base, or pals that you're battling with are interacting very weird. Now, this game is in early access, like I said before, so these are things that most likely will be ironed out in the future, but it's just something to take note of as you start your journey in Palworld. Another thing, especially if you haven't played before, it gets really, really dark at night. This does get remedied by an item that you get further into your progression, but it's one of those things that can be really frustrating and annoying early on, so I recommend carrying a torch or just cranking your brightness all the way up. But hopefully this is something that they remedy, because I do think that it is a bit too dark. Outside of that, I really don't have a lot of complaints about Palworld. I think they do a lot of things right. I think they add a lot of ways for you to progress in a sort of non-linear fashion, so to speak. You can take risks in terms of going after and catching, higher level pals in regions that maybe you shouldn't be in yet, and it's a little bit tougher, but you get that satisfaction of feeling like you're doing something and sort of like jumping ahead a bit, which is something I really like about the game. Some of the cool things that they've added since the initial launch are things like ore gathering veins for your base, which was kind of a big issue before because you'd have to build your base in a location where you could mine those things naturally, and this sort of restricted where players could have their base. And as this is a multiplayer game, or at least can be, that could be a problem when you have a big server and you have lots of people fighting for very specific spots. They've also gone as far as to add ways that you can mine other resources in your base that you couldn't previously, which helps alleviate that issue even more. They've added multiple new pals to the game, as well as variants. In this game, some pals have variants where they have different typings, they have a different design, but it's still, for the most part, the same pal. One of the things that might throw you for a loop if you're familiar with these kinds of games is that there's no evolution in this game. Pals do not evolve, which is something that initially I thought would really bother me, but it actually didn't. Especially as I got further into the game, I just realized that I just didn't really care all that much that they weren't evolving, and I didn't even think about it at a certain point. But if you're the kind of dad who's looking for a game like this with some story, this is probably not it, admittedly. I believe there is some kind of story that's sort of going on in the background, but it's not really spoon-fed to you in any sort of digestible way. There's bosses in the game, from area bosses like strong large pals, all the way to tower bosses, which is about as close as you're going to get to a story boss. In recent updates, they've also added a raid mechanic where you can summon a giant pal to fight and get loot from, as well as a whole new endgame area that has all kinds of endgame loot and really fleshed out sort of the end of the line progression that you have as a character. Seeing that kind of content pushed out in such a short amount of time since early release began is really encouraging for people like me who want to continue to play the game and see it improve. Before writing this review, I went ahead and started a fresh file so I could see everything that had changed in the game, and seeing the changes that they made to the technology tree, along with the implementation of these meteorites and world events that start spawning in the game, it just really is coming together to be more and more of a complete package, in my opinion. My final score for Palworld is a 9 out of 10. I actually struggled to not give this game a 10 out of 10, but playing this game, you see the bar where it is. Like, there's so much room for this game to grow and improve, and I think the game as it stands is in such a good place, but honestly, sky's the limit. So if you're asking yourself, should a dad play? I say absolutely. And if you want to play with this dad, I left our IP address down below for our server that we've been playing on. So if you want to join us, feel free to hop in there. Thank you guys so much for watching another Dad's XP video. If you like this video, make sure you like, make sure you comment and subscribe, and tell us what you want to see us play on the next Should a Dad Play.